Hey, good evening, people. How's everyone doing tonight? I see a few people are wandering in. Hello, wanderers. If you're wandering in later, not live, that's cool too. This is neurofeedback and chill, a weekly live stream every Monday night at about 6 p.m. A bunch of people show up and hang out and ask questions, and I usually rant on some topic. And tonight we're talking about why everything feels like it's your fault. What part of the brain might be involved with that sense that where you're both in control and can't control things at the same time. So, or things feel a little bit too much. Some aspect of the environment and controlling the environment that can creep over us and we can get out of control. So I wanted to dig into a topic and some physiology, a couple papers that came out not too long ago that can kind of help us understand how this stuff might works. Do me a favor, guys, and give me an audio check if you are if you're watching. So let me pull up my notes as well. Here we go. All right. So welcome to Neurofeedback and Chill. Hey, before I jump in, do me a favor, like and subscribe if you want to check out some neurofeedback or neuroscience content weekly. You want to get alerted when that stuff drops, when these live streams drop. Please hit that bell. If you haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Andrew Hill. I'll be your neuroscientist tonight, and I will teach you a little bit about this idea, this torture of the responsible versus the powerless. And a couple of papers came out that really crystallized for me a part of the brain, a whole clustered area of the brain called the right tempoparietal junction. And not just that specific junction, that specific lobe area, but all of the converging tissue that's connected to it, all of the network tissue, those kinds of things. Hey, Jehan, thanks for the audio check. Nice to see you. So let me paint the scene for you. Someone's in a bad mood maybe, and you find yourself replaying the interactions, trying to figure out what you did or what that tone of voice meant. Or maybe you get an email from your boss that says, oh, we have to talk. Instant dread, instant overwhelm, instant sense of judgment. Someone isn't texting back. That sense of things not being under your control, but still related to you, your fault. That's sort of the topic we're talking about tonight. And you might not think that area necessarily has physiology behind it, right? Or if it does, maybe it's very high level, like frontal lobes, for how we feel about things. But as many of you know who listen to my live streams or who are my clients in either education or neurofeedback, the orientation I like to give for the brain is the front of the brain is the inside self and the back of the brain is the outside world. And we're talking about tissue to some extent, although I'll tell you why that's not always true in a moment. But to a large extent, this tissue is behind the back half, behind the central divide. And so we're talking about tissue that's related to, that's representing, that's interpreting and interacting with the outside world primarily. Hey, some other folks rolled in. Hey, Radar Ashwood, nice to see you. Ryan, nice to see you. Any thoughts on traditional sauna versus infrared sauna for the brain? Ryan, I don't really truly know. I tend to think, I have some gut feelings on it. There's one data point that I'll drop on you, and then then we'll leave our side quest and go back to talking about the right TPJ. But yes, I like traditional sauna better. There's a bunch of reasons, but I just think it feels better and works better, and I've heard more anecdotal results. Also, there was a study out yesterday, day before, not too long ago, a week or two ago, that showed that temperatures up to 117 Fahrenheit seem to be protective. Temperatures above that can cause brain difficulties, perhaps. It was an association, wasn't a strong association maybe. But that's what I would use as a threshold temperature, regardless of which sauna you're in. And if you've done a lot of saunas with steam in them, you don't really get up above around like 110, 115. It gets really hot with that much moisture in the air. And so that's what I recommend, is kind of thinking about a 117 as a threshold. Think about it. When you're not in a sauna, doing 107 is like seizure inducing, hallucination inducing, et cetera, depending on a bunch of other factors. So, 117, 10 degrees above that's your mental like high water mark maybe for boiling off some steam without boiling yourself. And however you do that, if it's infrared, I think it's okay. I'm not sure. I think a lot of the infrared technology isn't that great, and it has a lot of dirty sort of like, light coming at you, but not necessarily a dirty signal, meaning like you're not necessarily like needing huge amounts of light infused right then. And it's also a little bit poor heat. A lot of the things that try not to be true saunas in some way don't actually heat up the same way. So some more folks are rolling in. I see Haida. Hi, Haida. Nice to see you. You're up late. So folks who are watching now or later, we've had a couple requests from our friends in Europe and the UK to move the live stream every week a little bit earlier, move it down to or back maybe by an hour, hour and a half, something like that. So those of you who come a lot and who hang out with me, I don't want to disrupt your schedule because I know how important it is. I hope it is. I hope you're enjoying it. I know a lot of you instead watch it later and probably don't care. But for those handful who come in every Monday, thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. But 6 p.m. Pacific has been done now for almost a year and a half. So we could roll it back an hour and a half if people think that's cool. Just chime in either now or later, and I will take that under advisement. I did just get a new tool. I'm not using it now. I did just get a new tool for streaming that I'll try shortly. And what that will let me do is stream to YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn, I think, at the same time. Definitely YouTube and Facebook. So I'll probably start doing this on a Facebook live stream as well. But I'll make people come to YouTube for comments maybe. Who knows? Anyways, back to the topic at hand. We're talking about the right tempo parietal area, the rTPJ. And my orientation for the brain, again, inside self is in the front, how you feel about things, the cognitive appraisal, very high level, lofty experiences. In the back of the brain, very representational, the outside world. The further you go back, the more representational to the visual screen on which you project the world. And the more forward you go, the more abstract, where the very tippy bits of the frontal lobes are in some ways the value and the feeling we have about things, the approach, the appraisal, the avoid, the bias we have towards the approach versus the avoid. Both the cognitive tips and the dorsolateral areas are involved with that approach versus avoid. So very deep stuff. We have a vote from Ilya of keep it current time. He's on Pacific. So we have some Pacific timers, some West Coasters here. Thank you for chiming in. I appreciate that. So I mentioned this scene. I framed it for you earlier. Someone calls and says, hey, we got to talk, or sends you a text or an email. Or you hear someone, make a curt comment, and then you're kind of chewing on it and processing it and over-processing it and potentially taking in a little bit more than you might want, which is kind of a thing. So kind of a difficult thing. Many of us feel this, it's a sensitivity. And this can grow into a larger phenomena where everything gets tagged as your problem, in this interpretation, this subjective, like, oh, they must be mad at me or something, I must be doing something wrong. But when it comes to actually doing the thing, to leaning into that action channel, if you will, that perceptual action channel, and that can mean sending the email, replying to the text, having the conversation you think might be hard, fixing the thing, paralysis can creep in. So pushing through concrete emotionally, not action-wise, but more emotionally. This is a state where you want or should, but can't. So this is really 3 circuits or 4 circuits having a conversation. You've got your right tempo parietal area, feeling about the outside world as it relates to the self. You have the right frontal area, right frontal gyrus, dorsolateral PFC, etc. These are involved with the avoid system, the cost of doing something. And you have the supplemental motor area or premotor, an SMA in front of it. And those are very much the supervisor. Are you doing what you want to do? So these three areas get a little bit locked up, and what you end up having is disinhibition of the right tempo parietal junction when the supervisor goes offline, or when the grumpy old man insists that things are bad. Then you have the interpretation, the overreaction to tone of voice, or even blowing up beyond cognitive things into more of a raw sensory integration from that back right area. So you end up with this imbalance between the self versus the outside world, where it's a little hard to find that boundary in some ways between you and the outside world, in a sensory way, in a emotional context way. And this part of the brain back there does a whole bunch of things on that back right, including emotional prosody or tone or lilt. Knowing if someone's stressed or if they're sarcastic or facetious comes from that area. But related areas just above the TPJ are involved with things like recognizing faces and pulling emotions out of that. And in there as well are areas involved with understanding, how you're picking up your tone of voice. And so there's this whole cluster of outside world integration tissue as the world relates to itself. And on a brain map, on a QEEG, you'll see, I talk in other videos about failure modes for different tissues. Different cortical hubs have failure modes or cramp modes or dysregulation modes that are somewhat common for that particular tissue. And often you'll see in many cortical resources that excess theta or disinhibition is the primary failure mode. It's very true for a lot of stuff, especially things like ADHD and some aspects of sleep, some aspects of anxiety. But honestly, in this case, you'll often see more complex failure modes because you have more tissues coming in from other areas being integrated. This is not just an area by itself, it's a hub. And so the brain is really bringing, in terms of this feature of agency and control over what's happening, understanding what's happening, letting it bother you, the brain's really sort of running three questions with this set of tissues. One of those questions is sort of self versus other, or self versus world question. How much is this me, my experience that I'm having, my tone of voice, my small sound that I should be paying attention to, and how much of it is filtered out an outside world and external phenomena happening. This is sort of question one, the first question, ends up causing things or influencing things, sort of a sense of, did I cause this? Or did the environment cause this? And if the environment is causing things and you're not fully in control, then you can start to have this phenomena creep in where agency or sense of control can drop away, especially with the SMA, the supplementary motor area, just in front of the precentral gyrus. And the precentral gyrus, I call it the stabilizer. The whole cluster is really the stabilizer. And so this combination of difficulty stabilizing the resource with the right mid-cortical area and the often activation, and now it's often excess beta, sometimes it's low alpha, low neutral tone, high beta, high revving of that engine. You'll often see that. And when that shows up in a QEEG or resting phenotype brain map, you don't know what it necessarily is, but it's something. And you can actually see the same phenomena on a QEEG. You can see excess beta waves, clusters of bright red, naughty beta waves, high excess beta. You can see alpha waves that are low as well at the same time, let's say. And those phenomena can represent more than one type of person's experience. One person could be picking up too much of the sensory and social world. It's just too raw. They feel too much. They have that poet brain and everything is too intense. And somebody else might be missing all of that information. There's so much coming at them that it's flooding and not being fully parsed and digested fully as an information stream. And that's somebody for whom they might miss the sarcasm or the tone of voice. And if that area gets really overwhelmed, and that can be a high amount of beta waves or a low amount of alpha or a bunch of other failure modes, but you'll often see a very large amount of beta, that area will create a lack of prosody, a lack of auditory monitoring of speech for tone and sarcasm and lilt and rhythm. And this will create difficulty, again, picking up sarcasm. But when it gets really bad, you'll lose your own prosody. You'll suddenly talk like this and have a lilt that isn't really, doing much. And you'll see that in really acute cases of anxiety or autism, both. Think about the high-pitched, anxious kind of, trope, the high-pitched voice. That's lost its prosody and under stress. And you can hear the stress if you have good prosody, but if you're losing the ability to notice the tone of voice, then you aren't noticing the stress you're carrying in your voice. The same way that someone who's potentially autistic but has intact language might miss sarcasm or miss somebody being silly and think they're being serious. So these are aspects of that back right area. And it can cramp up, it's the environment versus self line that's sometimes hard to tease apart. So that was one question. Where's the line, the environment versus the self, and how does it map in? With that mapping, the second question gets asked of the brain, which is, do I have any control over this? Can I influence this? And so this ends up being, is this something happening to you? Or is this something you can ignore, you can decide is irrelevant, you can control with your mind or action, your body in some way? One of the ways that these areas get cramped up is not just talking to the right SMA and the front midline, but the idea of agency, the control over the behavior, can also kind of cramp up in different directions, hard, using other tissues that are supposed to select the attention internally. For instance, the anterior cingulate, front midline, is supposed to hold things in our mind. This is the CEO, the lifeguard that stabilizes the executive, that selects from the competing thoughts. And so when the grumpy old man throws up a can't do it, not good enough, can't, I'm overwhelmed and I have no control over it thought, theoretically the CEO is supposed to decide if that thought is worth allowing into the full experience and focus of your mind and to be held there so you have it. And when the right hand side is not well inhibited, a lot of negativity will start bubbling up. And that back right, if it's due self and other, that whole set of clustered tissues now can cramp up together. You end up with this anterior cingulate and right TPJ hyperconnection, hypercoherence, or low phase lag between those areas. And when you see this on a QEEG, on a brain map, you will generally get some sort of environment phenomena, people feeling out of control of the environment. It's stressing them out in great detail. A very common example is having some misophonia, rageful sensitivity almost to small sounds that come up. Another example would be claustrophobia, in the sense of the environment being too constrained or constricting. And ironically, agoraphobia is very, very similar. The environment being too wide open, not boundaried enough, has very similar kind of phenomena for getting stuck. These are sort of tick-like phenomena. When the anterior cingulate kicks in, they become tick-like resonances of the right tempoparietal region. So it can create really squirrely behavior or resource management, cramped up resources in the brain. When these areas get overconnected, they stop regulating well. Let me stop and answer some more questions. Hey, Radar, how common is subclinical epileptiform activity? How common is it to have discharges but without seizures? It's pretty common, actually. Sorry, I was going to pop filter. I heard that pop. Subacute, subclinical spike activity, ictal activity, discharge activity is pretty common. And if you ask the question about, is it common in a population that's suffering, the answer goes way up, actually. If you took a population, let's say, that is suffering with neurodivergence, folks that are significantly autistic, major anxiety, major ADHD, major sleep issues, even some OCD features like Tourette's can be ictal activity, mid-temporal auditory discharge that I think goes through the anterior cingulate as part of the tick-like phenomena. So yeah, I forget the statistics. Jay Gunkelman will talk about this here and there, and I think the stats are something like, in a broadly neuroatypical population with significant developmental difficulties, the subclinical seizure incidence is something like 25 or 35%. It's pretty strong. And if you do a mental health complaint in general instead of a developmental screen, it's something similar but not quite as strong. And so, it seems to be that the brain isn't as good as stabilizing in many different cases. And also remember that, like, the way you walk is you throw yourself at the ground and don't, hit it. You keep moving forward. That's sort of how we think, is we almost go into chaos and then we snap back into a moment that's not quite order and go back and forth between it. We're on the edge of what's called criticality, the edge of chaos, and also the edge of becoming too specifically organized at any one moment in time. And that's a seizure, essentially. It's the start of a seizure, an ictal or a spike. And these discharges are fairly common in people in general. But in populations that suffer with developmental or mental health complaints, the incidence is actually pretty high. It's in the double digits. So ask Jay on his live stream with Pete Jensen's on Wednesday this week, I think. Usually on Wednesdays. They'll know. Jay will know because he has the stats. He rattles them off. Hope that answered your question. So, first question the brain's asking when it brings these circuits online is this about me? That's the princess and the P going, oh, I'm a little sensitive, the environment, okay. And then you have the wrestling with that input, the control. Do I have any influence over this? Is this me? And then, first is this me? Second is, do I have any influence over it? Can I control it? Third, what usually happens when I try to control it? So again, the right front corner, the dorsolateral PFC, the inferior frontal gyrus, which is like a grumpy old little kid version who wants to like pull pigtails and blow up toilets with dynamite, wants to be oppositional. Those two little activity or resistance or avoidance circuits will kind of kick into high gear, because if we don't typically have control, there's a learned helplessness, a learned avoidance that can start to really get loud. And if the princess and the P is sensitive, low alpha, high beta, if the right precentral gyrus cluster of the supervisor of the executive function is not fully online, making lots of theta, kind of squirrel, then it can't control that right frontal and the information starts bouncing. And if the anterior cingulate can't decide how much to listen to the grumpy old man, the CEO gets overwhelmed by all the angry shouting. And we end up with this pretty significant cramping up kind of environment. And it's a learned helplessness. It's a learned inability to act. And this is your predictive brain. Your frontal lobe's sort of saying, let me use some history to forecast outcomes, but the way it's getting to the place of thinking that things might be negative is not the full frontal lobe. It's this outside versus self kind of bind that you're in. So when these things get wired up in a certain way, those of us that are tortured or gifted by different unusual brains, what do you guys think of that title, Gifted and Tortured? That's my title of a new book I've written. Most of, if you want to check it out, it's about neurodivergent brains, and the primary title is Gifted and Tortured. The secondary title is Mastering the Poet Brain Phenotypes of ADHD, Anxiety, and Autism. I might do something less commercial, like Mastering the Poet Brain Phenotypes of Intensity, Sensitivity, and Creative Flow. So if one of those two titles grabs you more, let me know. But if you want to check out an advanced copy or an advanced chapter, I haven't decided which I'm doing, go ahead and throw your name on a mailing list you can get to in the show notes. And I'm going to leave that open for another few days while I'm doing a final pass. And then in about a week, I'll share it with the pre-reader list who signed up. And you guys have a week to get back to me with any observations, thoughts, things that are missing, stuff like that, things that weren't clear. And I'll incorporate any of your amazing suggestions. I know I have a lot of folks that are geeky and love this kind of stuff. So go ahead and throw your names onto that list. It'll bring you to my website, and you can see the cover of the book there too as well to give you a little reason to go. So, Catchy. I see TT Pierce. Hey, TT Pierce. Nice to see you. Catchy. Thanks. Yeah, I like the Gifted and Tortured. I just sent Peter Mulvey a little permission saying, hey, can I use some lines in your song? He has a song called The Trouble with Poets. And I want to put the epigraph. The trouble with poets is that they talk too much, or that they tell us it hurts them a little bit more, which is a song I've really enjoyed for years. So I tried to structure the intro with some of Peter's song lyrics in it. So we'll see if he lets me keep those in, or if I'll have to like make up some poetry myself. I'd rather just use Peter's because it's so perfect, but we'll see. All right, back to my idea. The brain's asking these questions. This outside versus self question, this can I influence this question, and then what happens when I do usually question. These create difficulty, and they create patterns of habit, of thought, of action, that are difficult to manage. They become about survival. They become about the outside world versus self. They become very social. These are really intense things. So question one, is this about me? The princess and the pea. Really, it's trying to figure out if these signals affect me. Do these signals coming in from the outside world concern me? Is this my state? Is this my environment? Or is this something further away? And so it's doing this self versus other, this self versus world. Is that their feeling I'm having when I see their stress in their face? Is it my feeling I'm having? That's something you're doing with that rTPJ, that princess in the P area. The self versus the world. Some of the filters, some of the sensory integration to filter out the environment as irrelevant and not causal to your experience. So that's really that right temporal parietal. If you have the high gain running in it, then you have, the overreaction, that gut clenching when your boss frowns, or when your partner is quiet, you sort of, I did something wrong. Or when a friend hasn't replied to your text, oh my God, they hate me. So objectively, could be about them, could be their thing, their bad day, their blood sugar, their traffic. But no, right then, it's about you. The dial stuck on you. The dial stuck on, yes, this is your problem. That's, half the misery here is that sensitivity, that inability to regulate the gain, and everything that gets tagged as self-relevant in some way, become very sensitized to the environment. Hey, this is the Sonia. Hi, this is the Sonia. Nice to see you. So what do you guys think? Does your brain auto-tag most bad stuff as your fault? Or are you all more like, not my circus, not my monkeys, Which way you bias to sort of attach to that ownership of stuff happening around you that's difficult? I'm curious if you want to share. There's a bunch of you here now. Hey guys, nice to see you all. All right, question two, the brain's trying to deal with the agency and prediction kind of combination. Do I have control over it? What happens when I try? Can I influence it? Can I do something here? Do I have moves in the situation? And this is the frontal systems coming online, the striatum, the motor networks, I can change the world, I can act. That'll bring some of the left hemisphere on, while the right was monitoring, the supervisor. The left stabilizer, left precentral drivers, left supplemental motor area is going to put its foot down on the gas, put you in gear and get you doing the thing. And your happy little kid in the left front is going to help you understand that you want to. The approach system that opposes the avoid system. They're both out there on the porch kind of playing checkers going, hey, what's up? When the world comes by, and if you have them in gear together, the approach system will keep you biased towards engagement, exploration, interest, curiosity. So in this case, when the princess and the pea has overwhelmed the environment, the self, as being overwhelmed by stimulus, either sensory stimulus, social stimulus, this left front can shut down really easily because it's hard to approach, to move into that noise, literally sometimes noise. And that lets the right front take over even harder. That grumpy old man and problem child, oppositional part. I don't care, leave me alone, let me blow it up. So these are difficult areas to deal with sometimes for some of us. And if the back right, if that tempoparietal area is driving it, things get really uncomfortable. And, it's no worry that this creates this sort of agoraphobia, some social anxiety, social disengagement. That's another version of lacking agency, of lacking the ability to move into the world and move through it and affect it. So the brain is doing this thing where it's saying, can I actually do something here? Agency, control, do I have it? And what happens when I try based on the past? What happens? And as I showed a minute ago, as I talked about the other circuits, these things multiply each other. When the left front kid doesn't get up and go outside and play, grumpy old man knocks over he growls at traffic, and the kid next to him knocks over the checkerboard. So we have this kind of cascade effect once the system gets into a certain degree of cramp and the circuits start to really get pinched. This is why you'll find people with social anxiety and some misophonia, a little bit of OCD, and some difficulty with executive function and sleep all at the same time, is because these are not one individual, resource chunks. Each of these resource chunks is part of a network. So just like the rTPJ comes in, the ones I'm talking about, these characters I'm giving you, these are big cortical hubs, and they have specific relationships, often in this case as related to other hubs. So scenario A, nothing's about you. Scenario B, everything's about you. You can act, but you can expect failure. So if you're in that scenario B, when you've got the learned helplessness going, the questions become self-answering. That creates the cascade. Is this about me? Yeah, everything is. The world's out to get me. Things suck. Sure. Yeah, it's definitely related to me and not feeling good about this thing. Question 2, can I do anything about this? No. No, I'm stuck. I'm broken. I'm exhausted. Ugh, leave me alone. No, no one likes me. Question 3, what happens when I try? Well, every time I've tried, no, I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. Things are loud. Things are stressful. I can't control it. That builds up, and you feel responsible for that state you're having. You try to control that, and you end up simultaneously in pain because of it, and frozen and unable to get out of that state. So the torture and the gift is that sort of sensitivity of that deep awareness of the world, but this torture where the world becomes so intense that we are frozen up, and as I mentioned, different circuits are involved. The rTPJ finds the outside sensory and social difficult. The frontal lobes, in their asymmetry, get a little bit jacked up in terms of the negativity bias. And we have trouble controlling, supervising our executive and our mood with those central regions. So this is what happens when we end up frozen. And it has a very strong right hemisphere component, especially behind the right, again, outside world. The emotional components to it start getting really, really intense. We end up with a sort of rejection sensitivity, the right front and back middle. If it's obsessive, you have like a relational OCD, which can happen. That's the front middle, helping you feel like you're not in control. So you get deeply, deeply worried about that and hyper-focused on that. When the right and the left are not cooperating in that communication, you end up with shouting over the CEO, and the CEO freezes up in inaction. We call that procrastination. And, really a great deal of difficulty around the sensory yoking, the sensory attachment of the brain, the social attachment of the brain starts to occupy huge amounts of resources. There's a truism. There's a couple papers on this that I probably should dig up and add to the book. I don't think they're in there. But there's definitely truisms about, in the field of neurofeedback, that certain things work better than other things when you give reward to the brain. I saw a paper recently talking about visual versus auditory that showed visual was stronger, but other papers that I've seen years ago showed auditory was stronger. But there's also a couple papers in general that talk about learning and how social information, social engagement will break the phenomena of implicit learning, understanding and knowing the rules deeply without being told, the patterns. The social information is louder than the implicit information in the background. This is why you can't do things, you shouldn't do things, in my opinion, like watch movies when doing neurofeedback, because the dimming of the screen or the audio is not that compelling against the social engagement that you're using. And it's masked. The implicit learning phenomena is masked by the the flood of the social information. This topic tonight starts to help us understand why, I think, a little bit more. So, all right, let me stop this topic for a second and go back to questions. Radar is confessing he has a bit of a negativity bias. Okay. What does high theta or alpha at T4 cause? So T4, right mid-temporal areas. High theta or high alpha at T4 could cause a bunch of things. It could come with a bunch of things. One, nothing at all, because you're just weird. People are weird. Good job. Be weird. It could, if it's really strong disinhibitory phenomena, often theta, sometimes delta, sometimes alpha, usually high theta. You can get auditory phenomena that are really hard to deal with, where intrusive thoughts that are auditory, replaying auditory conversations, even auditory hallucinations I've seen with often unilateral, often at T4. Now, you can have other phenomena that aren't exactly related directly right to the midtemporal, like vestibular phenomena can show up, like tinnitus or balance issues. You could have some sensory integration issues. You could have some language prosody stuff that's there instead of further back for some people. So it's a little bit person by person, but generally it would mean probably not a lot of great regulation of sensory information, attention, and maybe some emotional stability stuff. Might be a little bit labile in your emotions or reactive. Feel free to confirm that or not if you're talking about a specific case for someone with T4. So I mentioned this, the ways we cramp up, the rejection sensitivity, the procrastination, the guilt, the collapse, the overwhelm, the dread. Speaking of dread, on a QEEG, if you see tons of theta, the failure mode of theta, on the right frontal areas, including the right dorsolateral PFC, right inferior frontal gyrus, these usually mean those areas are disinhibited. That's the failure mode. Theta is disinhibition. The foot's off the brakes, there's air in the brake lines, whatever the metaphor. That's a different phenomena than having lots of alpha, which is a tissue in neutral or mode or background mode. So if you see lots of theta on the right front, the grumpy old man is grumbling about the end of the world and catastrophizing that things are over. It's not the outside world threat sensitive rumination that's the back of the brain, that's the outside world. It's the cognitive appraisal that things are too much, things are over, things are done, things are more than we can handle, the feeling of being overextended. So that right front area is very involved with that sense of stress, that sense of being overextended beyond your resource. The kind of, the grumpy old man can turn into a low frustration tolerance or an anger even. Imagine the sensation of being in stop and go traffic in a car that's about to run out of gas, and there's idiots in front of you that are like barely moving, and you're about to run out of gas. That anger, that resistance, that frustration, that lack of power you have to get things done right then, that's the grumpy old man often cramping up with low alpha or with high beta. When the theta's climbed, he's given up. Pulled the car over and he's like gently sobbing and is overwhelmed by everything being too much and is convinced things are going to be over. So take good care of these characters in your brain. Back to the princess, who's really tagging everything in the outside world is in some ways mine. With that right front, the prediction circuit being trained by the repeated adverse, emotional appraisal and experience, the whole system decides it's my fault, can't fix it, shut down. And that shutdown looks like lots of different things for different people. Substances, perhaps, dissociative, zoning out, doom scrolling, more acute dissociative stuff like, PTSD, panic attacks and things. These are not moral failures. These are coping strategies for a nervous system that's in protect mode. It's in a mode that feels deeply overextended. And this is what the gifted and tortured brain comes up with. And you'll see this, I've mentioned several circuits. You'll see most of these kind of co-regulating each other and out of whack, out of range, cramped up, pinched hard together often. The cingulates, the pre and post central gyri, and the right TPJ. So all 5 of those areas often will be communicating really aggressively with each other, not playing nice, not singing together, but being a lot of being a lot of raucous noise, a wall of sound, ironically. So just to give you another character name, just next to the actual princess and the P, we have one of the lesser characters, the bard. That's the actual meaning of tone, of prosody, not true lilt. So the outside world, the sensory versus the social, that's the true princess, the true rTPJ. Adjacent to it will be verbal prosody, sound prosody. Above that would be face recognition. So these are all related circuits that are dealing with the outside world, but the verbal areas, just to be very specific, so no neuroscientist who watches this calls me out, are not truly the TPJ. The areas involved with nonverbal information are a little higher up, and I call those the bard because it's interested in singing and understanding the rhythm of music in language, essentially. So those are your little whirlwind tour. Back to our, let's see, any more in my notes? Oh yeah, sorry, itchy lip. So what do you do? What does it matter if I'm giving you this horror story of all these different sensitive but cramped up areas in your brain? Well, there's hope. These areas, as many of you know who do neurofeedback, I see a few of you here, you can train these areas. You can train them lots of ways. Neurofeedback, large changes in a few months, but you can do things like meditation, sleep hacking, nootropics, supplements, all kinds of interesting things, medications. Lots of things can change your brain. So, all right, another question from, this is the Sonia. Can neurofeedback help increase processing speed? Sure. Drastically, in quotes, maybe. In kids on the autism spectrum. Okay. Sorry, I might have asked this question before I remember it. Maybe, Sonia. Depends what you mean by processing speed, how you're measuring that. If you're looking at someone's alpha, their peak alpha or individualized alpha frequency with eyes closed, and it's really, really slow, 3, 4, 5 standard deviations, which you'll see in developmental difficulty. You'll see in really acute sleep phenomena. Yes, that will change, and it will change a lot often, but you just don't know, you don't know if you can expect someone to get back up to typical or above average frequencies. It really depends on why they're slow. Some people's wiring is different. Many people, the slowness is like rubbing the e-brake in the car. If you can release a phenomenon like a sleep issue or some other, one of the areas we're talking about being extra offline, so not managing, like keeping the machine in gear, this left precentral gyrus, for instance, then you can get a very significant speeding up of the whole system as it levels out. So yes, but it's going to be really tailored to the individual, and the path of progress will be really unique. So, Radar Ashwood, in my experience, calming the cingulate just makes it way harder to lock in and be productive, and even more difficult to read. Well, the front midline shouldn't really affect reading too much, unless you're calming it with, and you're probably calming it with the wrong alpha speed with that combination frequency radar. That suggests you're slowing down your alpha speed somehow with the protocol. You might be trained, or maybe speeding it up and exhausting and getting a rebound effect, but that suggests you're mucking with your alpha in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense to do. I'm not sure. The reading part should be the back midline cingulates. But the front could also be a slowed processing thing. So I don't know. It really depends. You have to really dial these things in. As you're showing us, there's no real one-size-fits-all here. So back to our 3 questions. We can recalibrate the first one, Q1. Is this me or the other outside world? By working with that princess in the P. You can teach your brain that not every frown, every silence, every bad mood is your P under the mattress irritating you. So you can learn to recognize those things and gently retrain yourself cognitively. You can do things like meditation and neurofeedback. You can do, again, other things to train that sensory and that social filtering phenomena. HRV helps sometimes because, as anxiety goes up, that gets much louder. Question 2, we train agency. We train the ability to do things, to move into action. Small, repeated experiences of, I did a thing. I did it. The world changed. I didn't die. I did a thing. You got to kind of recognize those things and lean into them a little bit. That'll help you learn to take that agency. It'll tell the grumpy old man, the princess, and the supervisor, the stabilizer. It'll tell those resources, You'll bring them into gear. You'll show them a behavior pattern literally, and they will learn that as you repeat that. But you have to have that experience for it to happen experientially. You have to move through practice, and you'll create change. And then the third one, we can rewrite the third question by stacking new predictions, by stacking these wins, collecting enough. I tried it, it was okay. Will shift you over time from the activity bias or the sense of powerlessness or people judging all the time or the world being stacked against you. This is what you do with neurofeedback. It's what I do with people. I help them learn to sort of reshuffle these features. So quick company plug if you want to get a brain map. And we have a bunch of Black Friday specials, actually. I think I put those in the show notes here. But brain maps are $250 once a year. You can give one away to a friend as well if you get one. So the best deal in the world for acute EEGs, and Peak Brain has offices in New York City, West Palm Beach, St. Louis, Los Angeles, Orange County, California, New York City. Said that already. It's big city. London and Stockholm. Plus we can do remote anywhere in the US. We can do remote QEGs. Those are a little bit more expensive, but there are some deals on those, as well as full neurofeedback programs. Very, very sweet Black Friday style deals. So check them out if you're curious and we're thinking about doing a neurofeedback program. Now is the time. We only offer these sales once per year, and they will be gone at the end of the week. So if you want to change your brain, now might be a time to check it out. So neurofeedback or not, you can do these exercises I mentioned. You can move this cognitive strategy over time, and you can teach your brain that some things are about you, some things are not about you, some things you can do something about, some things you can't. And this will create a shift over time. So if your princess in the pea is driving your nervous system, that's the difference between being sensitive and emotionally aware and picking up nuance in other people's voices in a nice way and loving music with the bard, who's the friend of the princess. The difference between controlling those things and not controlling it is the gifted versus tortured. So, where are you in that? Where is your right tempo parietal cluster? Is it able to help you filter, to pick up with great detail and intensity and nuance the poetry of the world around you, the sensory and the social poetry? Or is it flooded by that information and it finds it really intense and therefore often negative because it's too much of it coming in? Or is it beyond that? Is it cramped up further? That's when you'll see things moving into more of an autistic, when there's so much going on that they shut down, and you end up with the inability to parse out the flood of information coming in with very strong sensor integration issues, very strong social difficulties. And that ends up being, a cramping up of the social function, which is what we call autism, basically, is a difficulty there developmentally. So folks, drop your examples that you've had, if you have anything you want to share, and your questions in the chat, and we can look at them through this lens and talk about them when I see on brain maps, what I see in you guys, and I'll answer questions on this podcast or this live stream later on. So if you're not watching this live, no worries. Hi from the past. I hope the future is better than it is right now. Just in general, that's a good rule to have. So you guys have been a wonderful audience tonight, asking lots of cool questions, lots of random things. I always love that. And so do me a favor again, like and subscribe, hit the little thumbs up on the video. YouTube loves that. If you want to share the video out on a Facebook or an Instagram or a Twitter, or TikTok or something, go for it. I'm going to start getting myself on TikTok shortly because I was told I have to learn to do book talk. Book talk, I guess, is the way that a lot of books are being promulgated now. And they have a huge marketplace of book influencers on TikTok. So I was informed gently by somebody much younger that this is the way to do some marketing, essentially. All right, last question maybe. Let's see. Hey, Radar, is cortical hyperexcitability related to inflammation? Cortical hyperexcitability would be related to seizure, perhaps. I don't know about inflammation. Maybe, yeah. I mean, glutamate, right? Damage could be inflammation. Not sure. You'll see lots of beta waves. You'll see hypercoherent beta waves. I think it's often related to an imbalance of the GABA versus glutamatergic systems. This is why you see that kind of phenomena in alcohol, chronic alcohol use, Once withdrawn, creates a glutamate dominant tone, and the brain is super high in beta, super high in beta coherence, and very low in power in delta. Now, that low power delta tells me it's probably not inflammatory. Often you see large amounts of slow brain waves when there's inflammatory stuff going on, or you'll see very low power because the system's so depleted. You don't generally see high amplitude beta and high coherence beta. And so I think of that as a hyperexcitable system, or a sensory system that's cramped up, like in autism, for instance. That's usually high amounts of beta waves, and it's hard to regulate. It's just chaotic and loud. So that's my take on your question. If I didn't understand it properly, you let me know. But I don't think directly related to inflammatory phenomena. So you guys have been a great audience. It is coming up on 50 minutes, so maybe we'll stop just short of an hour tonight. So if you are watching this now or later, please do let me know those questions. If you want to jump on the beta readers list, which is closing rapidly, jump on that. If you want this podcast or live stream moved an hour earlier to a different day, please chime in on that, and jump on some Peak Brain Black Friday specials if you want some of those. All right, you have a lovely evening and take good care of those brains, and I will talk to you soon.